Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're talking about the complexity of modern infrastructure monitoring. I'm SolarWinds head geek, Patrick Hubbard, and joining me, of course, most of you probably already know from Thwack, Adam Hurt. Adam, how you doing?
Hey, doing great. I'm excited to be here and talk about some infrastructure monitoring.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. You are a senior product manager for application performance monitoring at SolarWinds,
Right?
but you've sort of come to this from the pure application side, but from the cloud, right?
It's funny. I've done the opposite of what most people have done. So I really started in the cloud, started with kind of the modern application piece, and now I'm also the product manager for Server and Application Monitor, and really helping people manage both their on-premises applications and infrastructure, and kind of help them on that journey as well to the cloud.
And what I love about that history is that you started really with pure applications, right? The point of cloud is there is no infrastructure, and have
Right?
discovered that infrastructure is really important. And most of SolarWinds customers are actually hybrid. I mean, you hear vendors talk about hybrid all the time. I mean, we
All the time.
certainly do too, but they have ended up with these applications which have components which are on-prem, or maybe they're in another data center, or maybe they're integrated SaaS solutions. And so you're sort of walking down from pure application in the cloud into the infrastructure that actually represents what most of our customers are operating.
That's right. And you know what? Both infrastructure and hybrid infrastructure means different things to different people, right? If you talk about infrastructure on premises, it's pretty cut and dry, right? You've got your hardware, you've got your virtual machines, you've got your databases and that stuff. And then if you move to the cloud and suddenly you're using Lambda, is that infrastructure? Is that an application? What is that, right? It means different things to different people. And some companies, that is infrastructure. And suddenly the infrastructure team needs to own this new Lambda thing, and they have to monitor the performance of it.
Yeah, I'd argue that is modern infrastructure. I think we, always did it before from the hardware perspective, and there was a neat stack, and there was a rack, and it had all of, as you were mentioning before, all of the components were right there. You had root access to it all, and
Yeah.
increasingly it's sort of fanning out into all these components. I mean, let's pull up a diagram here of a typical application, and I mean, you can see right here if you were used to traditional application monitoring, right, where you've got access to the components, this
Yeah.
is wildly different.
For sure, it's changing. And you know what? We often talk about hybrid IT, and I think you brought it up earlier. And when we think about hybrid IT, like the simplest solution to it is, oh, that means you have some on-premises hardware, and then you've got something in the cloud, right? But what is that? What is that something? I mean, if you've just got a virtual machine in the cloud, great. You could monitor these things pretty much the same, right? They're pretty similar, some small variances, but it's really much more of kind of a journey and a spectrum of hybrid IT of, hey, do you have a couple things on premises, and then suddenly do you have Kubernetes in the cloud, and do you have Lambda and all this stuff, and suddenly hybrid IT is very complicated.
Right. I mean, what I loved about this diagram, right, is you have all the application components that are cloud-based, but you can see the application components that are on-prem, and you're looking at express routes, and you're looking at VPN connectivity and BGP and all of the other layers that are a part of that. And so I think a lot of us sort of come from, I mean, certainly me, I sort of start with the network, and then I layer on application components after
Yeah,
that. But when application components are a service, then those dependencies for infrastructure actually become more important, not less.
they do for sure.
Maybe there were a whole lot of vendors that sort of waved their hands at it and said, "Oh, you'll survive hybrid. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine." But that's not something we bought, right? That's something that's been sort of forced on us in order to bolt these things together. But it's not. There's not a lot of maturity that makes it automatically snap together. So I
For
think
sure.
that's the thing that's different right now is we're in a period where we, as monitoring experts, are supposed to be able to understand how to knit it all into something usable, and that's not always really clear.
And I think, it's good to kind of look at kind of the two ends of the spectrum here, and kind of look at the journey of hybrid IT and how you can monitor these things, and the problems that you'll face. And if we start with, you've got an application running on premises, it's maybe just on a single host. The things that you care about is, hey, is that host up? You actually care about the hardware, like, is the fan running? What's the temperature of that machine? Am I running out of memory?
Mhm.
And stuff like that. And then
PSU is okay, dead
PSU is
sticks.
okay
Right.
for sure. And then if you think about the far extreme end, and you've got a serverless Lambda function running, like it's totally different. You don't have a CPU. You don't have really memory that you need to care about quite as much. There's certainly no fans that you can manage. So if you kind of talk through some of the stuff that goes from the old hardware on premises to the Lambda function in the cloud,
Mhm.
there's kind of challenges and different things you need to watch for along the way.
Well, and then there's those other things, right? Like let's say that application maybe was, we won't say transformed, but let's say modernized, right? So maybe something that had been in a MySQL database or a SQL database for a long time has been deconstructed into something now with NoSQL document database type data.
Yeah,
And if you're a database administrator, it's still the same data. The application
for
is
sure.
still accessing the same data, but now it's a completely different specialty, and it's a little bit different in monitoring. So walk us through really the difference between a monolithic application and a cloud application.
For sure. So let's start with server and application monitor, right? So when you're using server and application monitor and you're monitoring infrastructure that's on premises, one of the key things there is your infrastructure is fairly static, right? So we've got dashboards that show you, hey, is a node up or down, right? Kind of your starting point of, is my infrastructure alive? And then on top of that, we put the applications, and these are often off-the-shelf applications. We've got things like SharePoint if you're running that there,
Right.
And different these off-the-shelf applications that you're running, and we'll pull metrics out of those so you can see, hey, is this up? Is it available? Is it performing well? And we're really kind of monitoring these at an entity basis, and we're kind of storing that information. And one of the differences when we go to the cloud and when we're looking at AppOptics, very much designed for things that are more ephemeral. Right? When you're in the cloud, if there's a problem with a virtual machine, you click a button, you blow it away, and you create a new one. Right? So kind of monitoring if that is there is kind of not as appropriate because these things kind of come and go. Maybe you have automatic load balancing and auto scaling where these things are just going to come and go by the hour and sometimes even in a few minutes.
Well, and in this example here, right, if you're using SAM, you can do a decent amount of cloud monitoring directly from server and application monitor. But the thing that is different and sort of as you're describing, like you start with the application. If you're an app monitoring applications, is you're starting with applications and then you push down into the infrastructure, right? You're trying to look at resource consumption for the platforms that are providing those application services. So that might be the hypervisors and clusters and VMware instances, or it might be if you're running Nutanix, it might be more visibility into HCI because you actually care about the physical assets that you own, that you manage, because they are having a material effect on the performance of the application. So you sort of start with the application definition, and then you're going to push down into the physical infrastructure. But if you're talking about Kubernetes or containers, that really isn't part of it. So is that kind of where that switch is to combining AppOptics with server and application monitoring?
It's a great pivot point, and we should. I think probably for a lot of people listening to this call, they've probably heard Kubernetes in their organization and probably not super excited about it, right?
Oh, no, it's magical. It's going to fix everything. You just, put a little Kubernetes on it, it's going to be fine.
That's certainly how it's sold. But for the, the infrastructure people that actually have to manage this stuff, now you have to learn Kubernetes and you have to learn how to monitor it. So, really at its outset, you have a Kubernetes cluster, which runs, can be on serverless in managed places, but often it's still running on infrastructure. And this could be in the cloud space, so you're still running VMs, and you have to monitor those. If you're the infrastructure guy, you guys still have to monitor the CPU and those things like you normally would. And actually, if we take a look at a dashboard in AppOptics, we can go a little bit deeper than that because there are some things that are important. When you're building out applications in Kubernetes, you have your cluster, which is a bunch of machines that are running Kubernetes all at once. And those machines are called nodes in Kubernetes. They just chose a new name, but they're called nodes. And then on top of the nodes, you run things that are called pods, which are just groups of containers. So you've got your cluster, which is a whole group of nodes, which are just virtual machines. And then you have containers running on top of that. And Kubernetes makes a lot of things easy, but it also comes with its own challenges. So one example is when you spin up an application or a service in Kubernetes, you have to say, hey, how many copies of this or how many pods of this should we run? And if you run into performance problems, if you're just the application guy, you say, hey, just give me more of these, right? If I want this to be faster, you say, instead of 5, I need 10. And it's like
But
the old
hardware's not
problem,
free in the cloud.
but hardware is not free. It's like the old problem of people spinning up too many virtual machines, on a hypervisor and thinking that they're free. But with a dashboard in AppOptics, we can look at, hey, what's the latency of this service? How much resources is this service using? Right? We can look at the total memory consumption across the cluster, the average memory consumption per node or per pod in the cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of the application developers just running wild, us as infrastructure people who have to pay the bill at the end of the day and manage this stuff can take a look at a dashboard like this and say, hey, you know what? This one service is using 80% of the resources in our cluster. We need to go have a conversation with these guys. Maybe this isn't appropriate. Right? And now we have the
Well, I was
visibility
going
to
to
do
say the
that.
other thing. I was going to say the other thing too is you've got, going back to the monolith example, right? If it needs more memory, if it needs more caching, if it needs more I/O, it needs what would be horizontally scaling with instances in a cluster, right? It's going to take care of all of that for you. And in inside dashboard, you can actually sort of see what it's doing and its tuning. But in this case, it's up to you, right? Like that application in Kubernetes is defined as a service, and it's typically not what we think of as a single application, right? It is multiple services that are actually flying in formation. And so to your point, it's like you have that initial moment of creating, like, say, oh, we need eight. We need eight instances at any time. Or you do auto load balancing as a part of the orchestrator. But it's like, is that really enough? If you have a bottleneck that's a part of that application, it's going to be one or more of those components, or maybe the way that traffic is moving, or maybe proxies, or you have security limitations or something else, or you're orphaning resources. So you really are looking at a whole load of those parts in aggregate that define that application with a lot more granularity than you normally would with a packaged application.
And with AppOptics, we have the visibility for the developer teams and the infrastructure teams to have this conversation, so they can see what's going on inside this cluster. What's the resource limitations on the nodes, on the pods? How have we misconfigured this so we have way too many pods of one service? And I think just as an organization too, when you're starting to use Kubernetes, it's good to kind of have these conversations of who's responsible for what, and just be proactive about some of these problems. Like if the application developer just says, hey, I need all these resources for my service, and they just write it in their code, suddenly they have that. But then it comes back and suddenly you're out of resources on your virtual machines that's running the cluster, and now it's the infrastructure guy's problem. Right. I mean, these problems are really shared, and you need to have that communication, and you need the visibility in order to drive those conversations properly.
So basically, it's that same problem that I think you and I have both seen before, where on a hypervisor, someone says, "Hey, this application is not performing well. I need more vprocs." And you go take a look at it, and it's over provisioned. So instead of adding vprocs, you actually remove a few. The performance goes up, and they say, "Thank you so much for adding all of those extra processors. I really appreciate it."
It's the same problem.
But you're tuning. So you're saying it's really the same thing. It's just a different set of metrics that you're looking at to be able to perform that.
It's really the same old problem that we saw in hypervisors. It's just the terminology is different, but it's the same problem.
We hear people talk about observability and visibility, and what we're really talking about with hybrid applications is we're talking about sort of changing that zoom, right? So if you're talking about increasing visibility, you're thinking more, or observability, you're sort of thinking about pulling back so you can see that broader integrated infrastructure. But at the same time, especially if it's new technology or something where it doesn't come with a built-in monitoring interface, you really are going to have to sort of zoom in to a particular technology or an approach that can give you the data that you need to really monitor all aspects of that application.
That's right. And the visibility is a good term to use because these things are different. And I think, one takeaway is that, hey, when you're in this hybrid approach, just realize that they are different. Talk about how they're different with your team. Talk about some of the failure options and the things that you need to watch out for. And then you kind of build a monitoring plan and look for the tools and the right ways to kind of get that visibility and monitor it with your team, because you do have to work together across your application and your infrastructure teams these days.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the good news is, even a couple of years ago, this was a lot harder, right? The technologies weren't quite as mature. We didn't have the same sort of, our customers weren't using a more sort of standard set of reference practices. And then, our SolarWinds and other tools, for example, weren't as mature as they were either. So this is a great time to really start. And I like that idea of working with the team and just remembering that this is actually just one more challenge to solve and that the tools are already there, right? So it's really just a different way of thinking about it. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're sort of bolting on some new attachments where necessary to increase visibility.
That's right. And you know what? If you're just trying to dip your toe into this stuff and you heard Kubernetes for the first time today, don't start a conversation in Thwack. There's lots of other people that are having these problems, and there's a community behind you as well.
Or just use a Kubernetes managed service, and then you don't have to worry about it at all.
You
just build your containers and push them
all
up.
the problems. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being with us today. We hope that you enjoyed this session, and feel free to reach out. Adam, where? Thwack?
Thwack is great. Yeah. Find us in Thwack, Adam Hurt. And yeah, thanks for having me, Patrick.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being a part of the session. Hope to see you guys soon.